Welcome all to the World Media Group's inaugural webinar. My name is Alex Delamain. I'm the president of the World Media Group and Amir, head of sales at The Economist. Thank you for joining us all. I hope this webinar finds you in good health and good spirits in these very unusual times. I'm thrilled to report we've actually got about 500 people registered for this webinar, which is amazing. And I also recognise that some of you may be new to the World Media Group, so just allow me 1 second to introduce who we are to those people. The World Media Group is an alliance of leading international media organisations that connects brands with highly engaged, influential audiences in the context of trusted and renowned journalism. So today's topic is something we certainly have permission to speak about, and we have inputs from other experts within our industry. We are in unprecedented times, which calls for unprecedented responses. Brand safety is a key issue for advertisers, but in the light of COVID-19, how can we evolve the brand safety discussion to ensure appropriate advertising in a time of crisis? Our chair today, Alex Altman, who's a global client president at Wavemaker, will be putting questions to our esteemed panel, and then we'll open questions to the floor. You will see that at the bottom of your screen there is a question box. Please feel free to fill in your questions into that box as and when you think of them, and then Alex will ask those questions at the end. If you're posting anything on Twitter or LinkedIn, please use our social hashtag, which is hashtag WMG Brand Safety. So with that, I pass you on to Alex to make the introductions to our panel.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone, if you're in Europe. Good evening if you're in Asia, and good morning if you are in the US. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe and I hope you're well. These are indeed unprecedented times. We thought, why not have an unprecedented or at least unusual approach to a panel discussion? We are all indeed panelists, but we are all sitting somewhere different and separate. The benefit of that is we can have a much bigger range of experts than we might otherwise have. So let me take a minute to introduce everyone, and then we'll get to the panel itself. The way we'll manage it is, I'm going to ask a few questions to each of our panelists, and then we're going to open it up, as Alex said, to questions from you, the audience, so that you get the best opportunity to ask what's on your mind to these 8 people. So let me briefly introduce everybody. Emma Winchurch-Beale. Emma is the International Sales Director at the Washington Post. Denise Turner works at Newsworks, and Denise is the Insight Director. We're also joined by Damien Douglas, Managing Director EMEA at Time Magazine. Then we have Joanna Meyer-Jones. Joanna works at The Atlantic and is SVP Partnerships. We're joined also by Alison Harbert, Head of Client Marketing at Investec. Janet Bayliss, Global Advisory Leader at EY Advisory. Stevan Rangelevich, Director of Brand Safety and Digital Risk EMEA at Group M. Harriet Kingerby, Co-founder of Conscious Advertising Network. And finally, Jack Dyson, Global Head of Content Strategy at SAP Customer Experience. The way we'll manage this is the introductory questions we'll keep to 1 or 2 answers rather than the whole panel, but we will bring all of the panel into that. If we have everybody ask or answer every question, we'll be here for some time. We've also asked if any of the panelists do have anything to add, they'll just raise their hand and I'll go to them. So if you're watching this live and you see some hand goes up, it's not because we need the bathroom, it's because you have something interesting to say. So thank you, everybody. Emma, if you don't mind, let me start with you. This is a time in many ways unprecedented, and particularly, and I'm sure we're all feeling this personally and on behalf of our families and friends, the desire for news and information is greater than it has ever have been. So I'm asking you from a journalist and an editorial perspective, how are the Washington Post balancing the need to report what's going on with the need to not create undue anxiety amongst the people reading, watching, and consuming what it is that you're publishing?
Thanks, Alex. So the Washington Post editorial mission has always been to inform, creating fact-based reporting that enables our readers to make their own decisions. We take that very seriously when it comes to our approach to covering the COVID-19 crisis. In this pandemic, people need reassurance and things to do. The Washington Post is here to do both, delivering trusted information and insights and practical advice. People are frightened, and it's our job, along with our colleagues in other news organisations, to be the guiding light and help them through this pandemic. We've adapted our newsrooms and invested further in the technology to enable to do this. In the current market, where usually busy newsrooms are now deserted as journalists work from home. They've had to adapt and have reallocated resources across the site. And all editorials are now interlinked with the situation around COVID-19. Lifestyle, business, food are just examples of areas that are in demand from readers who are seeking advice on homeworking, educating their children, baking, as well as advice on how to manage their lives through this pandemic. We've created a new COVID-19 subsection on the site, which includes live updates, a map, frequently asked questions, how to prepare, how to help, flattening the curve, and a newsletter. As you've probably seen already, the Washington Post infographic story published on March the 14th, which visually explains how social distancing can help manage the spread of the virus. It was actually tweeted by Obama and used by the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, on his state TV presentations. It went viral and has been shared by thousands, has now been translated into several languages, including Spanish, French, Portuguese, Dutch, and Arabic. Importantly, the tone of this article was informative and presented a clear visual that everyone could understand and underlined the importance of social distancing. We've made most of our COVID-19 coverage free outside of our paywall and developed a COVID-19 newsletter that's seen unprecedented sign-up to more than 700,000 to date, with a sign-up rate of more than 20,000 a day. People want reliable and trustworthy updates on this ongoing situation, and we've seen this reflected in a 140% increase in traffic to the site in March alone, and a substantial increase in subscriptions. So that's what we are doing from the Post perspective.
And that sounds a lot. Are you aware, Emma, of any editorial discussions that go on about what perhaps about information that the brand has but doesn't want to publish? I remember I myself listening to the story about in Italy some weeks ago when the newspaper got hold of the government directive, not yet published, that the country was to go into lockdown, or the region was into lockdown. The paper took the decision to publish it and was criticised in some quarters for doing so. It was felt that they had unnecessarily panicked people. I wonder, do such conversations go on editorially about what's safe and appropriate to publish versus what perhaps helps keep anxiety to a minimum?
I'm not privy to the editorial meetings, but as our approach is always to present the facts, so it's always fact checked. And so they will, one of the things that has been raised is that the data, you know, how much can you trust the data that's being released? There's so many different facts. And so it's really important as a news organization to really be thorough and be sure that the facts that you're presenting are very, very clear.
Absolutely. And Denise, let me turn to you. As people turn to facts and they turn to trusted news brands, what are you able to share the impact that we've seen in terms of circulation, which perhaps is a challenge right now, although digitally maybe not, readership, pass-through, engagement with news brands and their editorial?
Well, I would just echo what Emma has said, that actually people do turn to trusted news sources in times of crisis. You know, we did a piece a couple of years ago that talked about, since the rise of fake news, people find themselves turning towards more established newspaper brands. And if there's anything we've got to thank Trump for, it's the term fake news, isn't it? And I think it's even more so nowadays. So there are sort of two sides to this. One is, you know, the print and the digital. What we are seeing in print actually is a rise in home delivery, and even print subscriptions going up as people get, you know, the newspapers delivered to home. So I think that's a balance with, you know, some of the circulation stats that might need to catch up, that people are wanting to know what's going on and people still like the physical product. What we're seeing on the digital side, because the rapid growth over the last couple of years particularly has been on the digital side. And, you know, we sort of have 20 million people reading national newspaper brands in the UK on a daily basis, and that's only set, I think, to ramp up with all of the stuff that's going on. So we're seeing rises in traffic, site traffic, sort of upwards of 30, 40, 50%, depending on the title that you're talking about. We're seeing more time being spent with the content, but importantly also, I think we're seeing a greater engagement. So there's an uplift in not just dwell time, but also comments on articles, shares. So people are not just kind of passively absorbing it, they are actively engaging with the content that they're consuming.
Is there evidence that people are sticking to their preferred brand of choice, or are we seeing any shift in the editorial and the news brand that people are engaging with?
It's a bit too early to tell with the data at this stage. I mean, one of the things I would say is that we sort of, people do have a preferred news brand that they go to, but they don't just read one. People will often read a couple of different news brands. So I think that's always been the case, because I think, one of the beauty of the news brand industry is that people do have shared understanding, and it's not just about shared opinions, it's about actually understanding how the world is reacting to these sorts of issues. I think the other thing that I would say in terms of what we're seeing with I'm pretty certain this is reflected around the globe, is that we're seeing newspaper brands making best use of all of the technology that's available to keep their readers and their consumers really up to date. Podcasts, WhatsApp, daily briefings, Q&As and stuff. And I think that's great, isn't it? Because it shows that actually there's the whole sort of in the round of ways that people are interacting with their newspaper brands these days.
And that's a great point. That's actually a point a question I wanted to ask both Damien, to remind you, from Time, and Joanna from Atlantic. This change in, well, both just the spike in numbers, of course, the change in where people are consuming from, and perhaps a change in expectations of what they want or expect from news brands. Could you talk, maybe Damien first, talk through how your company is adapting to this, either in terms of different types of editorial or different ways that you're distributing that editorial and or making it available to your readers and consumers?
Yeah, hi Alex. Yeah, happy to. I think both Emma and Denise have kind of touched on areas that will be consistent through all of the members of the World Media Group. Certainly, I think first and foremost, this is a humanitarian crisis, and it's important, I think, that people recognise that publishers will take this through a more humane lens than potentially we're used to seeing. So humanising the story first, and then back that into their relative differentiated strengths. And I think Denise touched on that. People do have a brand of choice, and they expect that brand to be pretty authentic as we go through the coming weeks and months. If I liken that to my old businesses at Bloomberg and the FT, they'll look at the impact largely through a markets and economy perspective, whereas Time we'll look at the societal impact with regard to business and society. But each of those brands will remain consistent and authentic to their reputations. I think the big shift in commercial modeling, to Emma's point, is that everybody has been committed to making sure that COVID-19 coverage is in front of the paywall. And this is important, really important, as audiences seek, accuracy, truth, and insight. And I think we all have a moral obligation to step into this gap and make sure that COVID-19 content remains free and available to all. And this is happening across the Post, the FT, the Journal, the New York Times, and beyond. Similarly, we've seen audience spikes of plus 50% month on month, and that's consistent with what we saw in the 2008 financial crisis when I was back at the FT. And I'd be surprised that if anybody involved in this, certainly this group of publishers, didn't have a similar, traffic spike. But our roles essentially remain the same. Balanced, respected, accurate, articulate coverage that is free to air. But what we now need to consider is both this notion of value and utility, and remain authentic to our own individual representations. And when I think of how we go about constructing our editorial and commercial propositions, value, utility, authenticity, and tone. And I think the big thing right now is for brands, whether they're media organizations or brands themselves, is to be helpful and generous, because that's what people expect to see now. People stepping into a breach, rather than over commercializing or, get a sense of profiteering. That's not what this is about. This is about generosity, and it's about providing utility and being helpful.
I agree. I'm going to ask you the same question, Joanna. Just before I do though, I'm seeing questions come up. I know I said at the beginning we'd go through a range of opinions from each of you and then come back to questions. But I think I'm going to throw a couple of questions in. So Joanna, I'm going to ask you to answer what I've just asked, which, to remind you, is business models and distributions. Then I'm going to throw a question, if you don't mind, to any of those here that represent a news brand. And a couple of questions which suggest that the reporting is overwhelmingly negative. It maybe goes back to my first question about how does one balance facts with public good. And there's a few points being made that there's not enough. This doesn't mean diluting facts. It means having a balanced approach. The example that's given is that China seems to be coming back, but for some reason it's not being reported. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Joanna, though, just give me your thoughts from the Atlantic perspective, how you're making your content available to more people or the same people in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is it's as Damien said, a humanitarian crisis. But news publishers, premium publishers, journalists have a really important role to play at the moment. And I think that's why we're all seeing such a significant spike in our traffic, in our audience, and the time spent. People are hungry and they need information and news that they can trust at the moment. And, the Atlantic, like, again, all of the other international publications, respected publications on this panel, in a way feels like they were sort of made for this moment. It is their duty to provide information and data and perspectives that can help society and businesses kind of go through this. So I think our content really reflects that. I think it reflects the fact that we, as I said, need to be creating as much content. About 3 weeks ago, Jeff Goldberg, our editor-in-chief, dedicated pretty much the entire newsroom to covering the pandemic. Now that coverage has gone from trying to get the most recent information to thinking about long-term impacts. Probably our most read article was a piece by Ed Young called "How the Pandemic Will End." And it's sort of, this ties back to your next question, Alex, which was about negative coverage. And, we're in a crisis and it's a pandemic, and there is a lot of information out there that suggests that this could go on for a while, and it is not necessarily at a point of turning a corner or turning the curve at the moment. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that the journalism we're putting out there provides a wide range of perspectives with thoughtful, intelligent information that the public can all access and use. And I think Ed Young's piece sort of really demonstrates that. It's not like, here's how the pandemic's going to end, predictive news. It's very thoughtful, well-researched, scientific-based, multiple sort of choices, if you will, or multiple situations that we could find ourselves in. And I think that's at the core of our commitment. Now, in terms of distribution, the sort of second mandate from Jeff, outside of everybody focus on this particular crisis, was make sure that this information is free, make sure it's widely read, make sure as many people can get it as possible. So like the rest of the publishers here on the panel, we brought down our paywall, we created a podcast, we have daily briefings, we have a newsletter, we're thinking about the role of social in this moment as well. And as such, I think we're seeing not just growth, but sort of a change in our demographic of those that are coming. It's our duty, I think, at the Atlantic, for what we feel, because we are not a daily newspaper and have never been part of a news cycle as such. We see ourselves as the and partner. You might read the Wall Street Journal and the Atlantic. You might read, or you're likely to read, the New York Times and the Atlantic. That our responsibility right now is to kind of stay ahead of the curve of reporting. So we want to be having and thinking about conversations that might take place in 2 or 3 days' time or a week's time. And as such, be able to provide a different type of perspective at this moment. But content for all is at the heart of it, and information that is grounded in truth and grounded in accuracy. And just one more point that I want to make quickly, which is one of our top reporters, he's actually a tech reporter, Alexis Madrigal. when this pandemic started, he kind of, in addition to his day job of as a reporter and as a father of two and all of the other things he's juggling, started a free project where they created a separate site tracking the rate of infections of COVID-19. And that site is available for all publishers to use. It's an API to inform, again, their data. So I don't just think it's about information for the consumer. I think it's about information for shared edit purposes as well. And so I highly recommend we can all check out the site, but it's free site, free data, tracking the disease. Alexis leads the project, but now it has 100 volunteers. Right. And I think journalism, as its principles, can be applied here to the way that we are also tracking and using data.
Thank you. Denise, I'm going to ask you, perhaps unfairly though, so on behalf of your members, we've just heard a lot about how the industry is making their content available, and of course they're tailoring it to the times that we're in. So my question would be, your members, they spend a lot of time being concerned about what their readers know. To what extent do you think they consider how they feel, which is really at the heart, I think, of these questions that are coming up about the balance between reporting the facts, but perhaps occasionally overemphasizing the glimmer of light so that people are feeling a little better about things?
You know what, it's always a tricky balance, and I'm in you know, I've deep respect for people who are working as journalists in the industry at this time, when they're having to deal with such a massive influx of information, having to dissect it, you know, in just a moment's notice. I mean, I know as a researcher, I am almost absolutely inundated with research at this point in time. Every minute there seems to be something else being released, and I think there's nothing quite like a crisis to unleash new research, is there? So I think, I mean, my perspective is that they're having to do three things. They're having to do the what, so they're having to give people the facts. Mm-hmm. They're also, and I thought Johanna's point was well made, you know, they're having to do the why. What does this mean to you? And they're then having to do the how can you cope in this times. And I've seen, look, I went out on Sunday and I bought most of the Sunday papers. I want to get a sort of sense of how they're all dealing with this. And there was loads and loads of lifestyle stuff mm-hmm. in there, like what can you do in your garden, you know, how can you keep yourself healthy, all of that sort of stuff. So I think it's day by day, and everybody is sort of learning as we go along, but I think it is the why, the what, and the how can you cope is the sort of three principles.
Fine. And if I haven't addressed your question, anybody, I'm still keeping an eye on them. I'll try and come back to them. So please keep them coming. Alison, a question for you here. To remind everyone, Alison is head of client marketing at Investec. So my question is, how are Investec reacting, and how are you advising your clients to address what's going on?
Alex, I think this is obviously really challenging times for clients in financial services, and what it does do is it makes us all human, and it makes us get ourselves into a position where we have to communicate to our clients as a human-to-human relationship. And I think marketing can often push boundaries in other areas, but we find it really hard to be human in the way that we can connect with people. And so I think if there is a silver lining, as I keep saying to my kids, that there is always a silver lining, it really helps us to think about who we are actually trying to help and what are we trying to help them with. What we don't need to help our clients with is to inundate their inboxes with yet more insight, more content on things that some of the great publishing brands on this call are doing already. What we need to do is we need to think about the individual circumstances that our clients find themselves in, and we need to really address what it is that we can do that's honest in the way that we can serve them, that's relevant to them, and that we move at the right speed as to what's going on. Now, this is a really changing situation, minute by minute, hour by hour, and day by day. It's really hard to predict, of course, where this is going to go in the future. But I think if we can start to imagine this is the need today, and where can our products and our services, and more importantly, our people, try and serve our clients? How do we try and join those dots for them? Because our clients come from an entrepreneurial sector, they come from the corporate life. We've got got international clients that span the whole remit of what people are trying to do in keeping their businesses alive and trying to keep their people afloat. So there are a number of different ways that we're trying to reach out to our clients and customize processes and the kinds of communication, whether that's from a banker direct to a client or it's more of a segment by segment approach that we're doing. But it is forcing us to get really close to our clients and understand exactly what's going on with them. The second thing that I wanted to say was that it's also highlighting where marketing approaches perhaps haven't been as slick as we might have liked them to have been. And when you're working in an office environment, as agile as you might be, you can cover up a lot of those gaps in processes and approaches. This working remotely and trying to collaborate digitally has really amplified where there are some of those gaps. And so thankfully at Speed, we're trying to fix some of those gaps and work out, well, what are the systems now that that mean that we can do this? And it's putting us in a place where we can have more honest conversations with not just our clients and us.
Which is a great point. And I've got a question here from Jose who's asking, and I think I've heard this question many times. Do you think some of these behaviors, particularly around working remotely and working from home and connecting differently, to what extent do you think those will be legacy changes that will stay with us versus we'll go back to normal once we're free?
I mean, I think if I had said a month ago, we'll all be desperate to run back into the office, I would have been laughed at. But, you know, we're all desperate to get back into the office, right? And so the minute that those doors get flung open, we'll all be racing back in there. I do hope that some of this does serve to prove the point that this can work. And I take my hat off to IT experts around the globe who have worked 24/7 to make this stuff happen as quickly as it has. It's not the kind of project I ever would have wanted to manage, but they've done a terrific job, I think, with companies across the globe, and it has proved that it can work. I think that fundamentally shifts the way that people can operate. It shifts where people want to live. They don't have to be in a commutable distance to cities to be able to do this.
Okay.
So it really throws the dice differently now as to how we operate. Now that we've been forced to do this, it's no big deal to have a Teams call. It's no big deal to have a webinar with 500 people join up. So I think we can be more efficient, and the way that we're juggling, hard as it might be, between homeschooling and work, we're finding new ways to do this stuff. And I think as a human race, this is forcing us to do some good stuff that maybe we should have done earlier.
I agree. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm finding one of the ironies of the distancing is that it's helping create deeper relationships because we're talking to people in a much more personal way. I'm speaking to clients I've spoken to dozens of times, but we may never have discussed their dog or their children or their balcony. And suddenly those conversations are happening, and that creates a much deeper relationship. I'm very surprised actually with a panelist of 12, we're half an hour in and there's been no kids coming in, no dogs, no cats coming in. I think we're all doing very well on that basis. Let me pick up on something that you said, Alison, and come to you, Janet, if I may. Janet, to remind you all, worked at EY Advisory. You've always maintained your own, as a business, your own advertising throughout diversity, recession, and slowdown. What advice are you giving to CMOs right now about how they, on behalf of their businesses, should navigate this?
Sure. So, as I'm spending a lot of time with CMOs on a day-to-day basis navigating this crisis, I think it starts with the theme that Damien raised and Alison raised, which is it starts with humanity. And, we have to start with humans at the center and look at the human condition that we're all facing. First and foremost, we have to look at, the values that are emerging from this crisis. People aren't starting with their business objectives. They're starting with their values, which is, I want to protect my family. I want to protect my community. I want to protect my employees. I want to protect my customer. That's the starting point, which is a completely different starting point for a brand premise to begin. And of course, consumption behaviors, we've already talked about the transformation of people's consumption around news. One can also look at people's consumption around entertainment and a host of other things, which I'd call sort of the escapist behavior. All of that is changing very rapidly, let alone their consumption of actual goods. As we look at how supply and delivery and supply chain is so constrained right now. In certain aspects. So as we're going out and talking to brands, I would emphasize, I guess, three points. The first is to strike the right brand voice and tone. And I think it starts with the word empathy. We have to recognize as brands, and as I talk to CMOs, and certainly I think that any leader at this moment feels it. It starts with expressing a vulnerability in the face of an invisible force that's larger than all of us, and being comfortable expressing that to one's employees and one's customers. There are things we do know, and there are things we don't know, and you have to be comfortable with that uncertainty because it's reality. And I think that truth is well received at this moment. And I think someone mentioned it earlier, but it's also a moment to be very nuanced in one's tone and not be overtly commercial. Certainly, businesses are in the business of making money, but they're also in the business of serving people and serving customers and taking care of their employees. And I think that sense of purpose is incredibly well received right now. So being very thoughtful about that. The second thing I would highlight is that your brand is only as good as your experience. So while we often think about storytelling, and storytelling is incredibly important as brands, right now how that story actually manifests itself in the customer experience is more important than ever. So one can't promise something that one cannot deliver. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the experience right now. You've got new protocols around health and safety. For those essential businesses that are open, they're navigating new protocols for literally what's happening at retail. Obviously, we've already talked about remote working. You know, there are different things that are having to happen that everyone's needing to navigate. So it's a time to break down the silos between marketing and the brand leaders and the rest of the organization, because we have to be connected to customer care. We have to be connected to the people who are actually in the stores, in the experience, to our sales organization, to all the different parts of the team like never before. And by the way, that intimacy that you talked about, Alex, you know, that comes from some of these remote, you know, conversations that we're having on Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or whatever technology we're using, it's important right now. I think executive teams are coming together in new ways, and it's critically important because we have to collaborate in the C-suite. So focus on experience. And by the way, social listening, I think, is more important than ever to really keep oneself honest about what consumers really think. And then the third point and last point I would offer is brand agility. We have to stay on our toes. And I would say on a normal day, hopefully you have great coordination in the marketing organization across marketing and PR and the social teams and your web experiences and all the different places across, you know, your paid and your owned and your earned parts of your organization, and the things you manage inside your company and the things that you might manage through an agency or a host of agencies. But this is a time where you have to be more tightly wired than ever. And all of that teaming that normally might be okay needs to be awesome right now, because at any given moment, you might need to move a campaign, pause a campaign, change the message of a campaign, move to agile production, put out a new message. And so this is a moment to really lean into very agile messaging and much better teaming collaboration across a much broader suite of people, both internally and externally, than ever before. But above all, I would say across all those things, maintain the humanity and really think about empathy. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about with CMOs.
And I and we have observed the same things with the clients we speak to. But let me ask you the follow-up. To what extent have you observed that CMOs are, they've narrowed their focus entirely down to dealing with today? Or to what extent have they been able to deal with today, but also keep their head up with good situational awareness and think longer term from a brand and a marketing and a sales perspective?
It's a great point. And so I would say it varies. And I think the way, and I think everyone's at a different stage of really coping or managing their own organization. I think there's sort of three phases I would describe. I think it starts off first with resiliency, right? Your enterprise resiliency, and you go into triage mode, which is what do I need to deal with right now? And so, so you start with, acceptance of the pandemic and what's the impact on your organization. So it might be dealing with a supply chain crisis. It might be dealing with needing to take down a campaign that feels completely off tone for this moment. People hugging and holding each other in a moment where that couldn't air right now, for example. So you deal with sort of those triage moments. Beyond that, though, once we get through that, I think there's the lasting effect. So I think this is a moment where companies are starting to lift their head up now that the triage is, I'm starting to see more companies where we're moving out of that triage moment of enterprise resiliency, although there's still a lot of pieces coming to place. And we're starting to hear more conversation around, I'm realizing now that what this shines a light on is that these digital behaviors are here to stay. And the digital transformation that I've been working on diligently simply wasn't moving fast enough. And so if I look at the journeys that a customer takes through my experience, and if I look at how well my digital experiences were functioning, they need to move faster. And so they're starting to look at those digital journeys. And then last, I think there's the resurgence, which is how do you prepare yourself for what likely is, certainly economic hardship as we face what's happening globally, not just on the health crisis, but the economic crisis, and then how you start to prepare yourself to weather that storm, and then obviously focus on recovery. And obviously, I think with China being ahead of the experience in other parts of the world, there are a lot of lessons to be learned there, which is if you only focus on the short term and don't look at what's going to happen after the crisis, you will find yourself flat-footed. So the way I think about it is you have to think about the now, the next, and beyond. It's understandable you start with the now, but quickly start planning for the next and the beyond, because they will be upon us.
Absolutely. I think that makes sense. And I'm going to move on to a couple of questions coming through for, I think, Stephen and Harriet will be best. Stephen, you're Director of Brand Safety at Group M. Harriet, you're the co-founder of an ad network. There's questions coming about brand safety, fake news, ad blocking, word blocking. So I think if I were to summarize what I'm seeing here on the screen, there's questions around, and maybe Stephen, to you first. There's a lot of fake news we're seeing. There's a lot of attempts to scam people here. How are you advising advertisers to deal with this?
Yeah, so this is indeed, the situation is indeed a human tragedy, but it's also a harmster's bonanza, if you like, because whereas people are looking for trusted information, they will come across lots of disinformation, and that disinformation is often very much engaging. It's very easy to grasp on. It's actually catchy. And there is actually quite a lot of research that proves that people are more likely to share disinformation than the actual information, just because it's novel and they actually like it. How to fight this phenomenon, apart from media literacy, there are two ways. One is how what we advise our clients is to invest in trusted news, primarily, which is positive action. And then if you want to avoid disinformation outside in programmatic or in social, there are many ways. One of them is human vetting, an inclusion list of trusted publishers in which you want to invest. And I'm not speaking here only about big publishers who are present here today, but we cannot forget regional or local small publishers who actually have quite a lot to give and quite a lot of locally relevant information to provide. They can also work with third-party verification companies such as Integral Ad Science or Double Verify or Grapeshot, who can help them differentiate what this information is and how to avoid it. And obviously, what is most important is constant monitoring of your campaigns, which means you get a delivery report, you go through it, you check where you have delivered, you take out what you believe is disinformation, etc. The problem with disinformation in general is that it's often very difficult to define it, because it has so many of angles. So you can have a proper disinformation, you can have pseudoscience, you can have, is extreme left disinformation or not? Some people would say it is, some people are, or extreme right. So it's really, really tricky sometimes to play the ball, but no system is perfect, I would say. But we are, for the moment, big brands are for the moment doing the best they can to avoid as much as possible, or at the best of the capabilities of the technology that there is. Okay, and Harriet, I'll ask you the same question with the added part to, are these all techniques that your advertisers and your clients were deploying anyway, but they're just being enhanced, or are there new things and new systems and processes that you think people should and are putting in place right now?
Certainly. So just for a bit of context, we're not an ad network in the traditional sense. We are a voluntary coalition of around 80 organisations, from like kind of brands right through to tech providers and civil society, who think that the ethics should catch up with the technology of modern advertising.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that we've done that is put together 6 manifestos on key areas where we think advertising can do better, and they are topics that range from fake news to children's welfare to consent and hate speech, for example. So I think very much within our hate speech manifesto, we like to talk very much about human safety as opposed to brand safety, because we see that the decisions that advertisers make actually have impacts in the real world. I mean, I'm sure our journalistic colleagues, can talk to that. And I know that there was a report kind of made last week by Newsworks around kind of how advertisers kind of pulling their money from hard news in times of crisis can actually cause real problems. Mm-hmm. So our fake news manifesto kind of lays out 2 ways that we think that advertisers can really kind of take action, and the first of which is just really to ensure that hard news continues to be funded. What we've seen over the last couple of weeks is a few kind of the limitations of some of the brand safety technologies that our clients have been using kind of come to light. So we've had kind of Nandini Jami in the US and Jerry Dakin in the UK have pointed out kind of failings where kind of Double Verify and IAS have been essentially kind of denoting kind of good, kind of quality journalism as brand unsafe. And we feel like that needs to, we need to close those gaps. So we advise our, kind of our members to think about quality journalism in a different way to perhaps kind of programmatic advertising on the open web. And we feel like there's a role that advertisers can play here in understanding where their advertising is going and therefore what they're funding, because sadly fake news has a fake news has a business model attached to it. You can make a lot of money posting quite horrible stuff online. So we generally advise kind of advertisers to think carefully about trusted partners and who they want their advertising kind of money to go to, and also to take accountability around their supply chain and really think about, can we track where our money is going? Can we remove can we remove kind of some of those bad actors, or can we make sure that our advertising isn't ending up on some of the sites that might be spreading some of this bad stuff? And we point people to organisations like kind of NewsGuard or the nascent journalism trust initiative that are looking at how you kind of identify quality journalism and in that way.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Harriet. Jack, maybe it falls to you as to give a client perspective, and as luck would have it, there's some questions here. One, for example, from Charlotte about brands on the panel, and there's a few, but I'll bring it to you, Jack, about insight and perspective on striking the right tone. We've touched upon it in all of this, but what are your thoughts on how to continue to market during this and how to reach out from an advertising perspective in a way that is authentic, relevant, useful, but also appropriate to the times?
Thank you. I think it's internally and externally. So within our internal meetings, as much as how we're talking to our customers, we are doing our best to be compassionate and empathetic, not only to what we're saying, but how we're saying it. SAP, over 70% of the world's transactions touch one of our services at any one point. So we have a massive community of users and people touched by them who are affected by all of this. And so it's clear that this isn't a time for platitudes. At the same time, it's not a time for noise or alarmism or even a hard sell. We are trying to walk the talk on being a trusted companion. And I think it's something that a lot of brands have spoken about over the last couple of years, but suddenly now you've got to put your money where your mouth is, right? You've got to help people deal with uncertainty and complexity. As a company, we've open free access to certain technologies, to SAP technologies like remote education and digital learning and training and customer sentiment insights to help people understand how they can react. Plus, of course, we've got a content hub and a resource on our thought leadership site, which is the future of customer engagement and experience. And through all of those things, the tone of it's not what you say, it's how you say it is absolutely critical. I'd be really surprised to find out that there were companies advertising with the same messaging or going into a meeting, same messaging from 8 weeks ago, without at least some sort of a sense check that the right message is coming across to the right people in the right way and to the right audience, but also with the right cadence, right? You don't want to swamp people. So yeah, I think if it's a content hub that you're talking about, then it has to be useful. Everything has to go through a slightly more nuanced or focused governance process. Maybe it's something that some people have already been doing all along, but certainly the focus is a little bit sharper on these elements of the process to make sure that what you're saying is germane to the conversations you want to keep having with your customers in the medium to the long, as well as in the short term. So when we're talking about responses to COVID, we're saying, well, it's not necessarily just this crisis, it's ongoing, true disruption, rather than the way that word has become a bit of a buzz. Now we're facing real disruption. So what does that mean? And how can you use this moment to also look at how you're going to continue that conversation, right? So what foundational structures can you build now? If physical events aren't happening, then how can you make something that's going to be useful next year, rather than just like, here's a gazillion things on COVID. What else can we offer to help people beyond that, and open conversations that will be useful and practical. And to my mind, very much in line with some of the stuff we've spoken about already. I think that the brands that resonate best will be the ones that proactively build community and connection with their partners and customers.
Yeah.
And I think the easiest way to do that is to go back to your brand values and to go back to your brand purpose, the bit that's at the top of your website that says what you do and why, and make sure that you examine all of your actions through that lens, because that's the way to be true to your purpose throughout and actually deal with your customer in the right way.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's only been a few weeks, of course, longer in China and Asia, but we're observing broadly 7 types of brand behavior, but all of them are through the lens of successful ones, or the ones that resonate, are authentic to the brand. The tactics, of course, and the messaging may be very different, but they still feel authentically related to the brand in question. So thank you for that. We have a little over 5 minutes left. There's loads of questions coming in. I'm going to throw some of them out. Emma, I'm going to come to you first. I'd ask that we keep the answers relatively brief so that I can get through 3 or 4 questions. So Emma, for you, is it difficult to sell? Do you feel compromised selling advertising against an audience that's up for all the reasons you've already spoken about right now?
I think the important thing is to be empathetic to our clients and to reach out to them and help them in this time of crisis. We are doing a couple of initiatives to really help them. We're running a couple of masterclasses to help them address sort of the media currency in the post-cookie world, looking at challenges and opportunities ahead of the media ecosystem to help them manage this current crisis. So I think, we need to ensure that we are connecting with our clients and navigating them through this situation. And that's not necessarily, selling to them. That's just working with them, supporting them, listening to them, trying to make opportunities for them if that's the communication that they want to do, and just really understanding that this is a difficult time for them. And so that's the important part. It's, this business is about relationships, and those relationships run through good times and bad times, and it's how we work with our clients and our brands and our colleagues and our colleagues externally too to work through this together, because this is unprecedented in anything that we've ever experienced before.
Great.
Can I jump in there just for a quick second and just say, echoing everything, of course, that Emma said, this is about offering a service and a value to our clients that is not transactional. But what I'm actually seeing is a really interesting juxtaposition of business where we have, and I think everyone has sort of alluded to this, whether it's from a CMO perspective or from a publisher's perspective, that we have to move a lot quicker in changing our business than we ever have done before in this moment, whether it's adapting the technology we're using, serving our readers differently, working between different groups, breaking down silos. So I'm seeing this juxtaposition where on one hand, we're in this sort of hyper-paced business transformation, working together better than ever before on the business side. And on the other side, sort of slowing down the way that we talk to our customers and our partners, because it's not about an RFP cycle where you're reacting something and you need 7 days to turn it around. You're talking to them about building something that does feel resilient, that does feel enduring. And what I'm seeing at this moment, and it's still super early days, but the conversation isn't necessarily about how are you reacting to COVID per se, but how are we going to help you talk about those, purpose-driven issues of diversity and inclusion, climate, sustainability that were on your priority list before this and will be on your priority list after this. And now we have this sort of unique moment to slow down the way that we perhaps would talk about, the way we do research around it, the way we talk about ideas and content and the future sort of way of telling those stories. So there's this sort of, as I said, there's this weird sort of balance between like actually our business reacting and working very differently together to build new things, and our clients taking a different beat to how we have those conversations. So I thought that was kind of it's an interesting observation.
I agree. And Damien, if I can come to you to build on that, do you think we'll see a permanent change in how brands are looking to engage with your audiences? And if so, will we require different forms of measurement and success metrics for how successful they are?
The long answer is yes, I think, or the short answer is yes. I think to Joe's point, it goes back to intent. I think what we were talking about pre-COVID was a different form of capitalism and how people play into that different form of capitalism, which means putting their brand values front and center, because consumers are more aware of where product comes from, how it's made, and they're willing to engage in that conversation as it relates to technology and sustainability and inequality and talent. And I think that was a movement that's been happening in the last 6 months. And I think what COVID does is accelerate that conversation quite quick. I think the brands that will build equity also the next 3-4 months are the brands that take a proactive position in not necessarily solving the current crisis we're in, but being an integral partner to guide you through the current crisis, whether that's homeschooling education like we had done at Time, or whether that's hand sanitizers like Prada, Louis Vuitton or McLaren have been involved in. I think those are the brands that are working with genuine motive right now. And people have long-term memories, and I think they'll remember that when we come out the other side. So yeah, just act with a degree of integrity, be really clear on what your intent is, and be authentic to what you stand for. And I think that was consistent before this, and I think this accelerates that part of the process, and brands want to talk about it now.
I would agree. In some ways, everything's changed. In some ways, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Which feels like a nice place to end. I'm going to ask all of you very briefly, give me 10 words in what has surprised you most about what's happened over the last few days or the last few weeks now, either in terms of brand behavior, your business behavior, or just human behavior. And I'm just going to go randomly from the screen. Keep it brief. Harriet, I'm sorry, everyone take off mute so I can just come to you. Harriet, what surprised you most?
What surprised me most is the way that people have found humour in crisis. So not only have I been really enjoying the kind of Zoom video conference disasters, but I've also kind of been loving the way that people have been sharing their recipes for banana bread and then taking the mickey out of people who are baking banana bread. Absolutely. And all of that stuff. So definitely humour in crisis.
Humour and banana bread. Alison, what's been surprised you most?
I think it's been amazing how marketing has got closer to business stakeholders and really tried to understand what's going on. And I hope that there's an enduring usefulness to marketing that comes from that.
CMO in the boardroom, brilliant. Perhaps having some of the banana bread from Harriet. Damien, I'm coming to you next. What surprised you most?
The sense of community and respect to the people that really matter. I think we saw that last week with the NHS applause, and long may that continue.
That was wonderful. That was very, very moving, I found. Jack, what surprised you?
I would say that the fact that it's physical rather than social distancing, that we are more convivial and collegiate, and hearing stories about what brands like Leon are doing, helping beyond their business is great. I think more of that.
Absolutely. Denise?
I think for me, it is the sense of just the speed at which things has happened has sort of taught me that actually you don't need to hang around. You just got to get on with it.
Absolutely. JFDI, wonderful. Joanna?
I think it's this idea that also when a new normal sets in, suddenly the old world feels so very, very strange. And I will quote actually one of our journalists that said that COVID-19 might be a disaster that leads to more radical and lasting change. And right now I feel like there is this moment that feels like things could be quite different in a positive way on the other side. So a sense of underlying positivity.
Wonderful. Janet?
I would say for me, it's that the further we are physically apart from each other, the closer we actually can become. And so it reminds me of just simple truths, that people can be extremely good to each other. And, in everything that if you listen, it's a remarkable thing. And so I think with customers, with employees, with everything, I think people are listening better.
I agree. Emma?
I think, it's certainly in the UK, with the rest of Europe, we've had the Brexit of division. And I think this has really been the opposite. And it's really brought not only, us together with Europe and our colleagues, but the world has got much smaller because we've become this united force.
Finally, agreed. And Stephen?
How quickly we have adapted, actually, which proves how resilient we as a species are.
And I'll close and then hand over to Alex. Firstly, thank you everybody for your time. How amazing that the technology worked. There's a lesson for all of us. Thank you for your contributions as well. Alex will do the close in a minute. What I've been most surprised at actually is that we started at the top talking about, do we need more good? How do we strike the balance? But all 9 of you, I think all 10 of you, when asked what surprised you most, it's all been positive. And I can't help but think that there will be some short-term challenges and some short-term tragedies, but there's going to be some long-term good that comes from this. With that, I'm going to hand you back to Alex to close. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Well, I agree with that. And to somebody's point, silver linings are there. It's just a matter of finding them. But thank you very much to everybody for your contributions. For me, the key takeouts, and there are so many, is that it really does start with humanity. I think that was a message that was echoed from everyone pretty much. As publishers, we have a huge responsibility to be helpful and generous in this time of crisis. Brands need to strike the right tone. Empathy and compassion is really important. And I think, Janet, you mentioned that piece about being connected with your customers and really, going back to the grassroots of what's essential in terms of partnerships and relationships, or companionship, I think is a word that came out rather than partnership, which struck me. Brands need to be much more agile. That digital transformation needs to move much faster. And I think some people are struggling with that. Brand purpose really comes into play at times like this. So yes, it's something we write about, it's on the website, but to Alex's point, we've really got to look at that filter with everything that we do in market to make sure that authenticity is there. And Janet, I'm going to close with your positivity, which I'm really going to take away from this, is we are in the now, there's the next, and there is the beyond. And as brands, it's really important that we start thinking about life after COVID-19, because it will come. So on that note, I'm going to close and wrap and say thank you very much for all your wonderful insights and your contribution. I do have one bit of housekeeping that I'd like to share before we close, to just reinforce the fact that we have postponed the World Media Group Awards from April. Obviously, the date is now set for the September the 10th. It's still to be hosted at the Ham Yard in Soho. We've had over 100 entries this year, which is a 50% increase on last year. So thank you. We're thrilled with that number and appreciate all the additional submissions we've enjoyed this year. As you know, the shortlists have been made. The final judging day has been scheduled for September the 3rd, and we will be sharing some shortlisted case studies over the coming weeks. So please do revisit the World Media Group website on a regular basis. And I think Denise also, who's working on some content at the moment with ISBA, is going to be sharing that with us, and that will also be available on the website later. So please do revisit, as I say. Thank you again for joining. More of these to follow, especially after the resounding success of today's, and a massive thank you from me to everybody who's contributed. Thank you and goodbye.
See you guys.
Bye.